Support this bill without amendment and so divided. Honourable members, we now come to the Taxation, Annual Rates, Returns, Filings and Remedial Matters Bill. Now, when this debate was last being considered, this bill, we had reached Part 5. The Honourable Damien O'Connor had the call. He had 25 seconds remaining if he so wishes. I call the Honourable Member, the Reverend Dr. David Clark.
Mr. Chair, such full recognition. Mr. Chair, I rise to speak to Part 5, and I think it's probably appropriate after such a pause in the proceedings to remind members what Part 5 of this bill contains. The bill as a whole, we know, is essentially tidying up a range of tax measures. Labor will ultimately support it. There is little to disagree with in the bill. There are some things that we think are fairer than others, but on balance, this bill is aimed at ensuring that loopholes in the tax system are tidied up. It does nothing adventurous. It certainly doesn't introduce any pro-growth tax measures. And as we come to this part of the bill, we see the provisions on page 91 of the bill, 154, the contribution rate, that will give effect to the changes in KiwiSaver that are promoted in this bill. Now, they are very modest changes, certainly changes that are in the right direction. Labor welcomes National's Road to Damascus experience on KiwiSaver. It's far from a universal scheme, the kind of scheme that we would need to see our economy grow. We know we need more savings. We know we need pro-growth tax policy. We know we need proper monetary policy that would make sure that our export industries are supported. This government seems to be firmly and actively pursuing policies that involve it sitting on its hands rather than actually making changes that would support business. It talks a big game, but we see again in this legislation very little change. It is designed to maintain the status quo, to ensure that new loopholes are not seen or spotted or exploited, and that effort we must commend, but we must also note that there is no real change of any significant proportion that is going to make our economy run better than it is now. And that's why we know that many New Zealanders are finding times tough. They're disappointed in the efforts made by Mr. Key. Even those who supported him are now saying that they're disappointed, they feel let down, the economy is not growing, and so we understand their need to let out those feelings. And those of us who have a different vision, who believe that the government can do something to create jobs, who believe that positive things can be done, as opposed to this government which just says no and can't and won't and will not change. Our government, a Labor government in future, would make the changes that would grow the economy, and we would be more vigorous in our approach to KiwiSaver. The change proposed here to remove in section 154, clause 154, contribution rate, section 64 brackets 1 brackets A, proposes in the words before the paragraph 2% is replaced by 3%. This is the big change in this part of the bill. 2% is replaced by 3%. And my colleague is quite right. The Honourable David Cunliffe points out that this is a reverse of a change. This is the reverse of a change that this government made. It's a timid reverse. You know, it's a flip-flop, but it's a flop, I guess. This flip is in the right direction. They cut the minimum contribution rates for employees and employers to 2%. They're the reason that this 2% is in the legislation in the first place. It had been progressively raised to a 4% or 8% default rate of gross income by 2011 for employees and 4% default rate for employers. But this government took it and capped the employer superannuation contribution tax exemption at 2%, where it was 4%. So it took it from 4% to 2%, and now it's taking it from 2% back up to 3%. So, whoa, there we go. It is a flip-flop. It's progress. They're reversing out of a change they've made, but it's hardly visionary stuff. It's hardly visionary stuff. It's what we've come to expect from this government. It's the kind of thing that we've come to expect. It is actually damaging. My colleague Rajan Prasad points out that this is actually damaging to the confidence in the scheme, this kind of trading. Mr. Chair.
I call the honourable member, Dr. David Clark.
This kind of change does erode confidence in the scheme, and it follows along similar lines. The government also previously discontinued the fee subsidy of $40 per annum, and again it shows that it doesn't really have confidence in the scheme. Well, it does. Maybe it has a little bit more now. Maybe it has 3% confidence rather than 2%. It's got that little bit more. We could say it's 50% more confidence than it had before, but it's half of what it was previously when it was 4%. So we see a government that's switching around with small numbers in this part of the bill. It's trying to address KiwiSaver. It's certainly a move in the right direction, but it's not bold enough. It won't change the fundamentals. It's not going to be the savings policy that cracks it, that reverses this trend, this increased unemployment, the 1,000 people a week leaving for Australia, the worst economic record of any government in 50 years. These are not the changes that will actually make that difference. Now, if we move further through Part 5, we have the clauses on unsuccessful software development, and we see that these are designed to ensure that people feel comfortable investing in software development and are not placed in a position where they're carrying too much risk and are then unable to make the confident business decisions they need to make that develop new technologies that will take our country forward. Interestingly, I mean, there has been no doubt some confidence eroded in that sector recently with the government's spying illegally, we understand, on Kim.com as he went about his software development business in his own private home. So there's a certain contradiction in here. We see the government's actions on one hand dealing with a resident of New Zealand in an illegal way who's going about software development, and then on the other hand in this bill we have a measure designed to encourage software development. So we're seeing a little bit of tinkering here and there. We'll see the government no doubt reverse this decision in a wee while. We wouldn't be surprised. They've reversed or half reversing it as they did with the KiwiSaver. They'll probably say mildly successful software development will develop some kind of bonus, but completely unsuccessful won't. We'll see some amendment in due course if they're consistent in their inconsistency, Mr. Chair. But there's not much more than there's not much more in here than tinkering. Maggie Barry is suggesting we bring asset sales into this debate because her government wants to sell off the assets, and New Zealanders, 80% of New Zealanders oppose that. In this bill, I don't see a relevance to asset sales, other than perhaps I guess we might see software development as developing new assets, the kind of assets that might be profitable and therefore something the government might like to hock off if it owned any share in them, if it was to be consistent. But again, we're seeing an inconsistent government that is tinkering through this bill. Clause 165 deals with livestock valuation. And I'd be interested if the Minister and the Chair can explain, because I'm just not certain whether this is relevant to the decisions around, or the provisions and the changes around putting livestock into one class, either as capital or revenue items in different years in order to change the tax treatment. That may have been covered previously. Mr. Bennett is shaking his head. I'm sure he'll take a call and explain in due course whether clause 165 has any relevance in that measure, because we haven't heard anything from the Chair yet. Clause 170 in Part 5 talks about certain repairs to fishing boats. I speculated in a previous call about whether that might also be expanded to cabbage boats and whether there were any repairs provision in respect of cabbage boats, but we're not quite sure what cabbage boats are. We know that Mr Banks is fond of referring to them, is fond of discussing cabbage boats coming down rivers and whether he was in the last one or not. And I guess you wouldn't watch fireworks, my colleague Megan Woods explains, because it would be a dangerous place, and then you might need this provision for repairs to fishing boats or cabbage boats, as the case may be. We know John Key wouldn't probably have been in that cabbage boat that went down the river where the fireworks were let off, because he seems to not know. He tells us today that Kim.com was a resident of New Zealand. And finally, in this...
Chairman.
I call the Honourable David Cunliffe.
Oh, thank you, Mr Chairman. Very kind. Mr Chairman, it wasn't that long ago that New Zealanders were told by the National